The thing that bothers me a lot, and it's very frustrating, Katie, is that you try to get that across, and there's still a substantial number of people who thinks that this is a hoax, that this is just made up, it's fake news. It's not. Look at the numbers. 250,000 people have died. That's 250,000 people. We have close to 12 million infections. We're breaking the records prior set for things like total numbers of hospitalizations, total numbers of cases per day between 170 and 180,000, deaths between 1,600 and close to 2,000 now. These are real numbers. They're not made up numbers.
Dr. Fauci, people are really bummed out about Thanksgiving. How can you impress upon them the importance of not traveling and keeping their Thanksgiving gatherings small?
You know, I think, Katie, every family unit, every person needs to do what I call, a risk-benefit determination in your own family. Everyone is totally appreciative of the tradition, the love, the warmth that goes with the holiday season. But these are really unusual times. Do you really want to risk, particularly if you have a person in your household, in your family who's elderly or has a compromised immune system? You have to ask yourself, is it worth the risk? We're going to have a really good Thanksgiving next year because we're going to be finished with this, with the vaccines and the things that are coming along. So maybe it's best to just say, let's not travel. Let's just confine the celebration to the family unit that lives with you rather than bringing in outside people, putting them at the risk of traveling and putting your own family unit at the risk of people coming into your home that you have no idea if they're infected. And they could be particularly and totally innocent, Katie, that they have no idea that they're infected. They're with no symptoms, and then they spread infection. We're seeing now that that's becoming an ever more important modality of transmissibility and circumstance of transmissibility are the innocent, warm family, friends gathering at the home.
How do you get through to these people, Dr. Fauci, who insist that it's not that bad, that it's been blown out of proportion? I mean, how do you convince them otherwise? Because as you said, the numbers are surging. It's spiking in almost every single state in our country.
I've been dealing with outbreaks of infections in my position as director of the Infectious Disease Institute at NIH for 36 years. I have never seen an infectious disease, a virus like this, which can be without symptoms in 40 to 45% of people, give mild symptoms in about 80% of the people who have symptoms, and then in that 15 to 20% of people who have either recognizable underlying conditions, that could be age, that could be an immunosuppressed state, or every once in a while, an otherwise perfectly normal individual gets a very serious course and dies, counting for the 250,000 deaths. So we have a situation in this country where particularly younger people say, well, I know my friend, he got infected, didn't even get any symptoms, so why should I worry? Well, you should be concerned because A, it could be bad news for you, but B, you're propagating the outbreak. And although you don't intend to do it, you might be inadvertently, and I'll even use the word innocently, infecting someone else who will have a very serious consequence. So you almost have to call upon the societal responsibility that people have.
And people may not have comorbidities at all. They may, have comorbidities that aren't apparent or they don't even know about.
Absolutely.
That would result in a much more serious case. Dr. Fauci, I wanted to ask you about young people because you have 3 daughters. I have 2 daughters. My daughters are younger than yours, but they're out of college. But a lot of college kids are going to be coming home. How concerned should people be about that? Should they be quarantining? What should they do?
Yeah, I think it gets back to what I was saying before, is making a risk benefit assessment that if you have someone who you feel confident, a child, that they've really created their own bubble where they are, they've been extremely careful about that, they travel without going into crowded places like airports, then you could feel less concerned. You might want to quarantine, but in the Thanksgiving holiday, Katie, I remember when I was in college, it was like a 4 or 5 day turnaround. You don't have enough time to quarantine to do that. And that's really the problem. And testing still, you don't have everybody can get a test where they get a highly accurate, sensitive, and specific result literally within a very short period of time measured in minutes. You don't get that. We don't have that widely available for people.
So it might be better for college students to stay put.
The answer is yes, but I say that, and what we'll find out is people think, there he goes again, trying to just, the Grinch that stole everything. I'm not talking about shutting down the country. I'm not talking about locking down. I'm talking about being prudent during this really dangerous time of an acceleration of cases.
When you say dangerous time, I mean, I know you've predicted a dark winter. And again, I don't want you to be in the position of being the doomsday doctor, but how bad could it get, Dr. Fauci?
It could. If you look at the acceleration, the curve that Dr. Birx showed at the press briefing at the White House, the inflection of that, Katie, was virtually exponential, which means if we don't blunt that, you're already talking about close to 2,000 deaths per day. We're now more than halfway through November, 31 days in December. By the time you get to January, you could have a substantially larger number of deaths by the time we get to the end of of this holiday season.
Dr. Fauci, you have yet to meet with President-elect Biden's COVID task force as part of the transition. You've said he doesn't want to put you in an awkward position politically, but what up with that?
Well, this is obviously unusual times, Katie, very unusual, unprecedented. I have served 6 administrations, and within that context, I have been part of and experienced 5 transitions. And I could say transitions are important. I use the metaphor, it's like a relay race where you have someone who's running the race with a baton in their hand. When you're passing it off, you don't want the person you're passing it off to be standing still from a stop. You want them to be already in the race in the sense of running along.
Right.
And that's the best way to do it. But unfortunately, that's not happening.
Well, have you urged President Trump and the COVID task force that had its first briefing in a very long time, Dr. Fauci, as you know, have you urged them and emphasized the importance of this?
That just is not the way things work in that environment. It doesn't work that way, Katie. We just get up and urge them, let's do a transition. It's very, very clear how we feel about it, whether they accept it or not. That's something beyond my power and beyond my control.
Do you agree with President-elect Biden that more people may die because this transition has not been expedited?
Katie, I'm sorry, I'm not going to answer that question because that can turn into, not by you, but by others, into something that is a distracting soundbite that'll not be helpful to what I'm trying to do.
I understand. What do you hope President Biden implements ASAP when he steps into the Oval Office?
Okay. There are a couple of things that I have been pushing for with not much success. One is a uniformity of the response so that we don't have states doing things very disparately along the way, that we get a uniformity where everybody essentially adheres to fundamental principles, maybe the 5 things that I mentioned over and over. The other thing that I'd like to see is a much more aggressive testing of asymptomatics to get a better feel for what the penetrance is, because it's the asymptomatics that are driving the community spread right now. And it would be very nice if we had a point of care, highly sensitive, highly specific, cheap test that you could do at home, so that just what you and I are talking about, that you could take a test right now and say, I'm negative. You could have your son, a daughter, whoever, before they walk in the door, if they're college students, to say, take this test, wait outside 10 minutes, you're negative, come on in.
Well, how close are we to that, Dr. Fauci?
There is already a test that's now just been given, I believe, an emergency use authorization by the FDA. That's a home point of care test. It requires a prescription. It's not widely available yet. I would like to see those kinds of tests widely available.
Let's talk about the vaccine and the time we have left because it's so critical. Very exciting news with both Pfizer and Moderna, both about 95% effective. So, I mean, Operation Warp Speed was pretty awesome, wasn't it?
I think in all fairness, you have to give a lot of credit to the Trump administration for putting together Operation Warp Speed and having it very successful with regard to a vaccine. I mean, what's fair is fair. You got to give credit where credit is due.
Who was responsible for basically being the architect of that? Because I know it distributed funds to companies with a variety of approaches.
It was a combination of people, but a lot of leadership was seen from Secretary Alex Azar in the Department of Health and Human Services and Secretary Esper for the Department of Defense. But there was a lot of input from people. You know, myself and my colleagues here at NIH had played a major role in that, as well as colleagues from other agencies like the FDA and BARDA and ASPR. But the leadership of it, I mean, obviously it came out of the Trump administration, but the people in the trenches who actually came up with the idea of let's do this was under the leadership of Secretary Azar.
This is a new mRNA concept where you basically manipulate the DNA to produce, will you explain what mRNA is for the idiots who are watching this who don't have medical degrees?
No, you're not idiots.
For an 8th grader?
Okay, so it's a genetic approach towards the vaccine. Generally, the old standard way, you get a virus, you grow it up in whatever media, in eggs or in cells, then you isolate it, you activate it, inactivate it, or you attenuate it and you give it.
You inject the virus back into people.
Yeah, either killed or attenuated. That's not what mRNA is. What mRNA is really much more sophisticated. What you do is the Chinese put on a database the entire genetic makeup of the virus. And we know that one of those genes codes for the protein that you want the body to make an immune response against. So what you do is you pull out that gene and you stick it into a little sliver of messenger RNA. Now, messenger RNA's purpose in life is to code for proteins. So you stick that gene in there and you inject the messenger RNA surrounded by a little lipid covering. And then what happens when it goes in your body, that messenger RNA starts pumping out protein, which is the purified protein, which is that part of the virus that sticks out, you know, that spike that makes it look like a crown.
Right.
So the body sees that and starts making a very potent immune response. The reason it's important, it's incredibly flexible and quick. All you need is the sequence of the virus, pull out the gene of the protein, stick it in, and you're good to go. That happened literally within days of the identification of the virus.
So is this something that anti-vaxxers can't really have a problem with?
I would hope so. But anti-vaxxers have a problem with vaccines in general. That's the point. And that's why we're trying to reach out and explain in a very transparent way the benefits of how safe and effective these vaccines are.
This approach may have huge implications for other infectious diseases and other illnesses, right? Because it's a whole new ballgame.
Right. In fact, there was a lot of skepticism and concern about using a brand new platform, as we call it, in a disease that we really needed a vaccine. There were a lot of doubters and skeptics and people even who criticized us for doing that. But as it turns out now, it's 2 for 2. 2 that tried and 2 that have been very successful.
I know that Pfizer applied for emergency authorization and it could be available in December. I assume Moderna is going to be doing the same thing. So these high-risk populations will be the first to get this vaccine. Will this be as early as December, perhaps, that it will be available?
Yeah, there will be doses very likely that would be available for the first tier of the high priority people towards the end of December.
Like elderly, underlying.
Well, I don't want to get ahead of the board that makes that decision. It's the CDC makes the decision, usually with a lot of input from the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices.
So how will the rest of us get it, Dr. Fauci? Will I go to my neighborhood
Yeah,
drugstore?
yeah.
And how will I decide? Can I say I want the Moderna, I want the Pfizer, I want the AstraZeneca?
Well, it's going to be depending upon what those others have, but I think it's going to be indistinguishable, really. And you'll just go to your CVS or your Walgreens or your doctor's office or whatever, and whatever they happen to have ordered in, it's unlikely that they're going to have a menu of take your pick. They'll probably bring one in that they use, but they're both very efficacious.
It's important to point out it's going to require 2 shots, an initial shot and then later a booster. So
Yes.
when you say there are 40 million doses, that really is only enough for 20 million people.
Right.
When do you think there will be enough for the general population to get everyone in this country vaccinated?
We are projecting that by the time we get through the first quarter of 2021, in April, that we will have vaccinated the people who are in the various priority lists. Then you open it up to everybody else. We will likely get that started towards the end of the first quarter. And depending upon the uptake of people who want to do it, we hope that we get that really done as we get to the end of the second quarter. What I'm hoping is that there's not a lot of vaccine reluctance, that people, when they realize how impressive these results are, that they'll be very willing to come forward and get vaccinated.
Because, about 49% of the population has said in this Pew study that they definitely or probably would not get vaccinated at this time. Do you expect that to change?
I do. I think we need to reach out to them, get in community engagement, particularly among populations of people that would benefit more from it than most people because of their underlying conditions. And that is a large segment of minority individuals who are really at a higher risk. We want to particularly reach out to those communities that generally don't get vaccinated because of concerns of various types. And I think that the people who are fundamentally anti-vax, when they see, A, that this is a highly efficacious vaccine, and B, that it's safe, that they may realize that it's to their benefit and the benefit of the community to get vaccinated.
It's going to be really important, though, during this period, Dr. Fauci, for people to still practice social distancing, wearing masks. It's not as if suddenly, the vaccine is here. Aren't you worried that people are going to kind of get overly relaxed and not be as careful?
Well, that's the reason why, if you hadn't brought it up, Katie, I was going to bring it up myself. Thank you very much. We should not consider this as a substitute for public health measures, but as a very powerful complement. Unless you get the virus crushed, namely at 95% of the people get vaccinated, and the virus has no place to go, then you can feel safe about pulling back on public health measures. But I think as the vaccine gets more and more utilized, that the stringency of public health measures will become less and less and less and less. But I don't see in the immediate future abandoning public health measures like masks, like physical distancing, like avoiding crowds.
But I understand from one of your answers that you think by June or late June that you're going to have enough vaccine so that the entire population will be able to be vaccinated.
But let me tell you that will be depending on the other candidates that are in the queue that are doing their trials, because there isn't enough vaccine from the 2 companies to cover all our needs. The federal government has contracted with Janssen, which is a subsidiary of J&J. They have done that with Novavax. They've done that with Sanofi. They've done that with AstraZeneca. So we need all of those companies to come through with an efficacious vaccine before we have enough for everyone. It's not going to be handled just by 2 companies.
Are you pretty optimistic they will?
I'm cautiously optimistic, Katie, because they're using the same spike protein that I spoke to you about, that immunogen. It's in a different platform. It's not mRNA, but it's in a way that we're cautiously optimistic we'll get the same level of efficacy. But in all of science, that remains to be seen. You have to prove it.